Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the film Furiosa. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Furiosa.
The origin story of renegade warrior Furiosa before her encounter and team-up with Mad Max.
All right. Yet another origin story has arrived on our doorstep. All the prequels.
Yeah.
All the
That's what you
prequels.
wanted, right? Like you specifically asked for more origin stories, right?
Right. Of course. We always want to know the answers to questions that we don't care about. That's
Come on. That is the most important part of filmmaking. Come on, Jen.
Oh, all right. Well, let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Furiosa. All right, Sarah, what is yours?
Innovations in farming come from the most unexpected places.
Yes, they do. Apparently, if you put a human underneath, a tree grows really well.
Yeah. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah. All right. My one-sentence summary is Fury Road's amuse-bouche.
Oh, it's so good. Yes. You just eat it in one bite and you're satisfied. Good to go.
Yeah. Leaves you wanting the real meal, Okay. Well, let's dive in and share our thoughts about Furiosa. In this first section, we won't include too many details about what unfolds in this film, and then we will include a spoiler alert. So we'll keep our thoughts at a high level. Okay, Sarah, I am curious to hear your thoughts about Furiosa. I suppose the full title of this film is actually Furiosa: A Mad Max Saga. So, okay. Sure. Apparently, it's a whole saga now that we're embarking on.
Well, and just as an organic plug, we have reviewed now all of the movies in this organic saga. Granted, all of our other reviews were from quite a while ago when we were still the Strategic Whimsy Experiment, but they're all back in the archives if you want to hear our reviews of Fury Road. I think that was like episode 34 or something. Like it was a long time ago. And then we reviewed all the Mad Maxes, I think in 2020.
We did. It was the thick of the pandemic. I remember that.
Yeah. So we have gone through this saga, and now we're here with Furiosa.
Yeah, number 5, I believe this is out of the saga, the entire Mad Max cinematic universe. That's a good time. That was like the depths of COVID. Nothing was coming out in theaters, obviously, and apparently we needed some excitement in our lives. So we were like, let's go through all 3 of the original Mad Max films because we love Fury Road so much and just wanted to knock that whole saga off our bucket list. But yeah, we're back.
Yeah, our iconic franchise, you got to see it. So we did.
Indeed. So, what are your thoughts about Furiosa, the 5th installment in this series?
Yes, I feel a little conflicted about this movie.
It's my favorite kind of episodes.
After seeing it, I was talking with a friend and he was like, oh my gosh, how was it? And I was like all over the place in my response. So I'm going to try and be a little bit more focused here on the pod. We'll see if I'm able to like better collect my thoughts having seen it now 24 hours ago.
Yeah.
So I think that this is very well made, and it's engrossing action, especially the scenes with the rig, very exciting, very reminiscent of Fury Road without trying to be Fury Road 2.0. It's not as good as Fury Road. The entire time I was watching, I was just like, I want to watch Fury Road again. I don't really want to watch this. And I think one of my main thoughts while watching is something that we alluded to earlier. Why does this exist? And I think that that's a problem that I have with a lot of prequels is what's the purpose? We didn't need this. Like, sure, it's cool. It's a cool world to be in. It's very well made. It's a fun watch. But the whole time I was like, did we need this? And we didn't. So I feel a little conflicted about it. The whole time I just wanted to rewatch Fury Road. So I rewatched Fury Road this morning. And that movie still holds up. And I think that helped me, though, almost better appreciate some of the things that Furiosa does, and the way that these two pieces do go together quite well, even though they were made, 9 years apart and have completely different casts. Like, they are part of the same vision, which makes me appreciate Furiosa more, but I still don't know why we needed this.
Yeah, like we were alluding to earlier, answering questions that maybe we weren't asking yet. In that way, this film going into this film, it reminded me a lot of the feeling I went into watching Solo, a Star Wars story. Remember that gem of a film? Which is just, again, this is an iconic character that I think is so beloved and so adored, and to open up the backstory of this character is just I mean, it's a tough choice to begin with for that to land well. I do think Furiosa does a far better job of really fleshing out the backstory of this character that is so iconic. I think a lot of that has to do with George Miller having thought about the backstory of these characters before even filming Fury Road. And I was reading online that he actually gave those backstory like write-ups to the actors and actresses for them to read up on those characters, to understand who they were and why they are the way that they are before filming Fury Road. And I think his original intention at the time seemed to be potentially filming them back to back, which I really wonder how it would have impacted how this movie looks had they done that. And, used a lot of the same sets, filmed in a lot of the same locations. And I think that the way that the two movies look, I think, is one of the big things that was missing for me when it comes to Furiosa. Obviously, Fury Road does such a commitment and dedicated effort to using a whole host of practical effects, and a lot of the post-production work is meant to enhance the experience versus be the primary method of creating these visuals. And I feel like that felt like such a big gap and such a big difference with watching Furiosa. So that's one thing that I feel like doesn't work as well. There's some like creative set pieces and types of action sequences that we can talk a little bit about that I thought felt in line with the creativity of some of those action scenes that we saw in Fury Road. But Furiosa leaves a lot to be desired, especially knowing what George Miller and his team are capable of when it comes to practical effects and action set pieces. I think my other big problem with this movie is the character arc and just the way that it is structured. Some of the elements that we kind of don't get as much time to lean into. So I feel like a lot of the ingredients are there for the backstory of who Furiosa is and what she went through to become the character that she is. But I don't think it's executed well for it to be a great story with the emotional gut punch that I think they were looking for. So I think that just the character development leaves a lot, for me, leaves a lot to be desired. So we can talk about some of those aspects as well. It's funny, I also ended up starting to watch Fury Road after getting back home from the theater, which I guess that's our review of Furiosa, is we both went home to watch Fury Road afterwards, which is fascinating. I didn't finish the whole thing. I think I made it about halfway through, but I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts, maybe as the film in Fury Road developed a little bit more, where you saw some of those connection points. I was watching Fury Road feeling the gaps between the character development in Furiosa versus in Fury Road. So I feel like that was my main comparison point between those two movies, which was fascinating to see what you might have collected and picked up on as you were watching Fury Road.
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't remember Fury Road very well either. In my memory, that first chase, that first act was the entire movie. I didn't remember anything outside of that because that was my favorite part of the movie. And I remember watching that first act and being
Yeah.
just in awe, and I was holding my breath, and I had to pause the movie after that first chase scene just to catch my breath because I was
Hmm.
so like engrossed in the action. So that's all I remembered of the movie. And so it was really fun to watch it again and actually see like, oh my gosh, there's a whole story here. Wow. I had forgotten that. Um, I think I really appreciated. So I agree with you visually, Furiosa. There are certain points where I was like, oh my gosh, this leaves a lot to be desired,
Mm-hmm.
especially the parts that were clearly like green screen. Um, but I think for me, I had forgotten that there was so I'd forgotten about the style of like camera work and the way that things are like sped up really quickly in certain
Mm-hmm.
parts, and just this very like George Miller type of filmmaking. I had forgotten that that's how Fury Road was filmed. So going into Furiosa, I was like, wow, why are we doing this? Why is there so much time lapse? Why is there so much fast forward? Like, I don't understand. Why is the camera moving this way? I don't like this. Because I had remembered Fury Road very differently than it actually is. So it was those things that helped me like, oh no, they are more connected. And I remembered all the practical effects, and I watched so many behind the scenes videos of how Fury Road was created. So I remembered the behind the scenes more than I remembered the movie itself. And so I had forgotten how much like the colors looked, and how the visuals were accentuated, and how these colors were brought in. So returning to Fury Road helped me see that Furiosa wasn't as far off visually as I had remembered it being, because I had remembered Fury Road quite wrong. So revisiting that
Mm.
really did help me connect the two more than I had going into it.
Yeah, yeah. I think especially the style of filmmaking in and the like camera work and all of that, it is very different in some of those like non-action sequences that I have forgotten about as well. So like in the opening of Fury Road when we meet Max and he's getting into his car, it is that same like sped up, jerky movements type of filmmaking style. And I think a lot of the camera angles, some of those punch-ins, feel almost like a cartoon. Like I was envisioning watching Furiosa, I was envisioning this movie as a action cartoon because so much of it is
Mm-hmm.
big and stylized and shot very differently than a traditional action film or a car chase that we might see in like a Fast and Furious or in some of these, big franchise action movies. This is such a distinct style, and just kind of envisioning it translated into a cartoon with like the flamboyance of it, I think makes it really fun and very unique to this specific franchise, which is kind of fun too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Furiosa is quite different than Fury Road is, but I do appreciate that there are those things that the two movies share in common so that they don't feel as disjointed as maybe they could have. And I think those little choices with the camera, things like that really help make sure that we know that these two are connected.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think watching Fury Road, at least especially in the first half of the film, too, when we are getting introduced to a lot of our key characters, I think that's one of the things that made me, one, appreciate Fury Road even more because I think it was just such a visceral experience the first time that I didn't have as much brain capacity to appreciate all of the character moments that we get to be introduced to who these people are and some of the choices that they make. And I think it made me realize like, oh no, there's a way to do this in a really smart way. And I think some of that is missing in Furiosa. So with each of the key characters that we meet in Fury Road, they're such distinct like details and small moments that those characters make certain choices when they're pressed in these difficult situations that I think are so indicative of who these characters are. And I think Furiosa could have benefited from that type of show don't tell style of showing us who these characters are. Um, The way that we meet Morton Joe, the way that we meet even Furiosa as a character. Like, she's kind of an enigma to us for the first like 45 minutes of the movie. But even then, there's still these small choices and ways she relates to her team, the way that she relates to the five wives that I think are like just carry so much weight. And honestly, I think by the end of Furiosa, there weren't enough of those moments where we get to really see like, who is this character? I think I needed Furiosa in the movie Furiosa to have wrestled with a little bit more, to have been pressed a little bit more, and then to see who she is and the things that make her grow or that make her struggle, that then those emotionally satisfying moments that would come at the end would feel really earned. And I think for most of the movie Furiosa, she's kind of this like just really great action star, you know what I mean? Like, she's incredibly competent. She's obviously very clever. She can, as a young child, weasel her way out of difficult situation. As an adult, she's obviously very competent, and so we get to see her execute and be really competent in a lot of situations. But beyond that, I think there wasn't as much for that character that I think is what makes a really great origin story for an iconic character, is to see how did they become the way that they are. And I think instead we get more of, hey, Furious is really badass. Do you remember? Yeah, we're going to show you some of that. And that's kind of the focus. So I think I maybe I'm just looking for a different movie, and some people are probably just fine with seeing Furiosa just be a badass for about 2 hours and a half. But it just feels like some missed opportunities there.
Yeah, I can see that, and I think I felt that too. This is also the longest Mad Max film, and I definitely felt that. I think for me it was a little too long, and I thought that it was an interesting choice for the pacing of this film for Anya Taylor-Joy not to show up until an hour into the movie. And I think for me, that choice, I don't know, I would have made maybe a different choice, because sure, we know this girl is clever, she's cute, she's been through hell, we get it. But I wanted to get to the point where we see Furiosa become Furiosa. I wanted to see how she becomes the leader and driving this rig, and how she loses her arm, and like all of these things that I might have questions about, as opposed to just seeing her trauma as a child for a whole hour. Even though like it's very well done, the actress that plays young Furiosa does a great job, like all of that is great, but I was like, okay, can we get to the adult action rather than seeing this child continually traumatized and having to respond to all of these grown men trying to manipulate her, use her, ogle her, whatever. Like, can we get past this? Can we get to the action, please? And so I wish that the movie was paced a little bit differently, got us into the action maybe a little bit earlier. And so then maybe we could have more time to develop some of those things in adult Furiosa rather than spending so much time with kid Furiosa.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I think honestly, we build more of a connection with her mother during those sequences, and rooting for her and all that kind of stuff. And she's great. She's a key part of this story. But our protagonist is Furiosa. I think that this movie would have benefited from being a little bit simpler and a little bit more narrow. Like, we have the whole triangular relationship between Furiosa, the Citadel with Morton Joe, which we already know about him, but he kind of is in this movie ish, sort of. And then we've got Dementis. And the film could have been focused solely on Furiosa arriving at the Citadel, start the movie there, and just watch as she navigates to figure out how to survive within this environment. Like, more time with her as a mechanic. Let's just follow her there as she rises through the ranks to become the Imperator, which we finally see her fully realized by the end of this movie, and then the kind of like ushers us right into Fury Road. Or focus solely on this weird relationship that she has with Dementis, who, and the complicated nature of the years that she's grown up under him, and maybe there's some revenge or something like that she's looking for her mother, but then that's the main focus of the story. Instead, we get a lot of like somehow like fights and interactions between Dementis and Immortan Joe, which is great, makes for some really fun action sequences. But I think it takes away from this being a really narrow character focused story about Furiosa. There's these kind of two men that are relevant in her life, but perhaps we spread ourselves too thin and kind of took a breath approach with going through these, 5 chapters of her life, and really could have focused a little bit more on um, either her rise to become full force Furiosa or this complicated relationship with Dementis. I think all of those, there's so much to explore there. And I think one thing that, the Mad Max franchise universe sagas all do a really great job of is the dynamic of the larger society and context in the wasteland is often really fascinating themes that are interwoven into the story. And I think we just get a little bit less of that. It was fascinating to watch Fury Road and see how much that is so integrated into the story from the beginning with Immortan Joe and the Wooder, and you see the, like wealth gaps, the classes, all of that kind of stuff that I think is such a big important theme in these Mad Max movies. And I think had this been able to focus a little bit more as well, we would have gotten a much richer character story, but also there's just these larger themes that they would have had time to really soak in and flesh out fully.
Yes, because when I think about the themes in Furiosa, I'm intrigued and I want to explore those a little bit more. I think especially the contrast between the male dominated wasteland versus the female dominated land of abundance. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a really interesting contrast. And I don't know if George Miller was trying to make a movie about the patriarchy and the way that that kind of shapes and molds everything, but I think that that's what this movie kind of is. This girl is ripped from this land that is where women can lead, and it is fertile and it is lush and there's cooperation and it's beautiful, and she's ripped out of that and put into this very patriarchal, colonizing, dominating, violent space, and has to leave behind who she once was to then survive in this wasteland. And I think that thematically and those themes are very, very interesting and worth exploring, and that's something that I've been thinking about after Furiosa, but I don't know that the movie does a lot to get me there. It's mostly I just wanted to think about this, and I think it's interesting through the lens of Mad Max to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a great time, but I don't know if that's what George Miller was trying to do. And I think that there was a missed opportunity there to maybe highlight these themes a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's all there. I think that's the I mean, always like fun and interesting discussion for us about a film is like those ingredients are there. We maybe could have really like invested the time in the course of the film to bring those to light and explore all of those complexities, because I think we got to see that side of and that vision that Furiosa and Fury Road had. This was the dream that they were making this escape to go and build a better life there. And so to have explored that dichotomy a little bit more and had more time to look at that vast difference between these two worlds would have been really, really fascinating, really fun. The theme that I spent the most time thinking about, which I think again is there, but could have benefited from a little bit more time in, is just that whole interaction between Furiosa and Dementis at the end. Maybe actually, spoiler alert, perhaps if you haven't seen Furiosa, we're going to dive into all of the aspects of the film and including the ending. So this is your spoiler alert. Please watch the film before listening to the rest of this episode. Okay. So that conversation that they have at the end, I thought felt like it could have been such a prominent theme throughout the movie, but we just kind of get to it by the end. So his whole bit that he tells her around like, you can kill me, you can, and you can lean into that vengeance within you, you can lean into that rage, but it will not make you whole. I just thought that whole theme could have been so fascinating to explore, how she goes from perhaps following that natural like overwhelming rage of having been ripped away from her family and all of that kind of stuff, all of the injustice that's been done to her. And to see her go from that to where we see her by the end of the movie and at the beginning of Fury Road, which is, no, I'm going to fight for a better place. I'm going to hope, and I'm going to try to do what's right. That whole transformation, I think, what could have been an amazing bit of character growth and whole journey for us to go on with Furiosa. It's a theme that I think is also in line with the Mad Max series in general. We see this in the original Mad Max movies. We see it in Tom Hardy's Max in Fury Road as well, of just being like, look, I'm just trying to survive because this world has taken everything from me. And so I'm cynical. And I'm no longer engaged. I don't want connection. Like I'm just, retreating to just sheer survival. And to see a character like Furiosa hope again and fight for something again and want to seek a better place, that's a huge transformation that is so meaningful, and I think could have been really significant for making Furiosa an even richer character, and would have made this, origin story prequel feel really meaningful for us to arrive at who she was by the end of this movie, and then also who she is that we fell in love with in Fury Road.
No, that's a really good point, and would serve also as such a good contrast between, who she was maybe raised to be versus who Dementus and this world has made her to be. The rules of the wasteland are revenge and looking out for yourself and survival, because there is nothing else. And in the land of abundance, in her home, it's collaborative and it's cooperative, and you can sense that there is probably some semblance of hope there, just because you can hope when things are growing and you have community and all of those things. So it's almost a returning to who she used to be and returning to her true self, even in the midst of this world that is telling her to respond in the exact opposite way. Yeah, that would be fascinating to explore a little bit more.
Yeah, and they could have done this whole really meaningful sentimental thing around like her mother telling her to like return home, and like her returning to herself is her way to return home, even if she's not physically arrived there yet. You know what I mean? Like that could have been incredible. And then one of the side characters that just makes a fast little appearance, what's his name? Praetorian Jack? I think they could have
Mhm.
really used that relationship to be the thing that begins to soften in her, for her to see that there is hope, that there is people that are worth fighting for. Like all of that could have been so meaningful to be that turning point for her. Perhaps he, sacrifices in some way for her, whatever it is. Like there's something about that goodness that she has finally rediscovered again in the wasteland that allows her to hope again, to have seen it, to have been loved in that way. And instead, he just kind of shows up. They have some nice little conversations that feel really comforting, and then homeboy dies. You know what I mean? Like that whole bit, I don't know, maybe in the original script it's a longer segment, but it felt a little rushed to me. And it felt like it was supposed to feel really significant, but I don't think, again, we don't have time to really get to know him, to get to know how they are with each other. And then he's getting dragged and then he's gone, And I wondered what perhaps another version or the original intention of that character and his role in her story could have been, should have been. What are your thoughts on that character?
Okay, so I have two thoughts. I
Okay.
was just happy to see Tom Burke in something. Let's good job. And to land in Furiosa as like the third build, good
Yeah,
job,
great.
buddy. Rooting for you. Love to see it. Love to see it.
Mm.
And then my other main thought is just relief, honestly. When he showed up and
Mm-hmm.
we see him with the black on his forehead, and I was like, oh no, are we gonna have a romance subplot in this?
Of
There's no
course.
time for romance in Mad Max. Get that out of here. So I'm really glad that the movie didn't go there. There's a little
They
something.
imply it. Yeah.
It's implied, but it's not shown, and we don't have to have a dramatic romance in the midst of the wasteland, and I was very thankful for that. They connect, they have a bond. She opens up to him. It's a very important moment for her, who has been so just isolated and alone and cut off from the world, and she's able to let someone in, and that's very sweet. But I'm glad that we didn't go any further than that. So relief. It could have been worse, Jen. It could have been worse.
It really could have been. What they're like sitting in the middle of a rock formation, like crisscross applesauce at each other, and their foreheads touch. It could have been kiss immediately after, you know what I mean? But they chose not to. They
chose not to.
No.
We're showing some restraint, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, that movement's cool because it's also kind of like echoing that symbol of like connection and affection that she had with her mother and the rest of her community in the green place too. So I thought that was like a tasteful way to show there's a connection here. Interpret it however you will, viewers. I think there's plenty there to interpret it as a romance, but they don't spell it out for us, which is great because our headcanons can do whatever they want now.
Exactly. For me, it's not a romance. It's just maybe like the very, very, very early stages of romance, where you're kind of like liking each other, but you're not going to like say anything. That's the stage that we're at. And I'm like, that's great. That's cool. What else? Let's get to the action.
Yeah. And then homeboy dies soon after.
Dies.
Fastest
he had to.
Fling ever.
He's not going to be Mr. Furiosa. Like, he had to die in this movie. So, might as well. Just before we get too invested, take him out.
Yep. And then we get that whole highly implausible sequence where she is apparently chained up, surrounded by all of Dementus's henchmen circling around her in motorcycles, but has somehow... Maybe she used Harry's invisibility cloak. I don't know, but she's cut her arm off. She's slashed all the tires and has escaped undetected. So we get that whole sequence next that I'm just like, I'm going to call bullshit. But I think I'm supposed to have my brain off. So I guess we'll just be moving right along.
I have so many questions.
Yep.
How did she sever her arm from her body? How did she do this? I needed just a little bit more because that question is real strong. Like, how did you do this? But aside from that, I would love to know the answer, but we're going to keep it moving. I so appreciate that she takes her own arm off. I love that was the choice. Because the whole time I'm watching, I'm like, okay, she's got 2 arms now. In Fury Road, she only has 1. So how do we go from 2 to 1? What is going to happen? And anytime she's in a vehicle, anytime she's in a crash, anytime she's fighting, I'm like, oh, is this the time? Is this when she's going to lose her arm? And it wasn't. And I really like that choice, that another person didn't take it off. It wasn't from an accident in a wreck or something, but she chose to chop her arm off so that she could escape and survive. And I think that makes a lot of sense for this character. I also like that it was the arm that she had been drawing her map on that she had to sever. And so I think that there's also this meaning of like her starting to like let go of that home. She has to let that go in order to survive in the wasteland. And so I think thematically, that's also something that's really interesting.
Wow. I hadn't even thought of that aspect of it. Good job. See, look at you with the metaphors. This is great. The symbolism. That is really cool. Actually, I hadn't thought about it from that angle. But yeah, I think the other detail that is like that, I don't know. I like that she's the one that cuts her arm off. I wish that scene happened differently because I think that is so cool, but there's just so much other implausibility shrouding that whole scene of how she accomplished that I wish they just executed that bit better. The other aspect that we see that is part of Furiosa's look in Fury Road, that we get to learn a little bit more of the backstory on, that felt really meaningful, is her hair and the fact that she chooses to shave her head as a young child, after Morton Joe's creepy son basically tries to take advantage of her, and she uses her hair, which is kind of symbolic of this like unwanted approach from this like male figure to then thwart him and to escape. And I just thought that those little details were also really really cool and really significant. They added extra meaning to these things that, again, like I wasn't really thinking about, but when framed in that way, feel really neat, because I think it's a part of her iconic look in Fury Road, and we get to see kind of the backstory behind that. And to your point earlier, like there's all these themes of being a woman in this type of environment, in this wasteland, in this very colonizing type of society, and how she needs to figure out how to navigate is a big part of who she is.
Yeah, yeah, that was fascinating too, to just see that contrast. And then she ends up growing her hair back out again, which
Yeah.
I think is also really interesting. So we go on a whole journey with her hair throughout the film too.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of just being something that she does just for whatever reason, I love that this film, like you said, infuses meaning into that really cool, iconic choice that we get to see in Fury Road.
Mm-hmm. And then we get to see that cool like bundle of hair on a branch time passing transition shot, which I was like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
sick. I love it. That's the kind of stuff that this movie is having so much fun with, which I really love. There's a lot of those like interesting transitions that happen where we're like focused on an object and then it is like nighttime, or like we get to see time passing in this really interesting way that is so unconventional. I think really wouldn't work in another movie. It'd feel really cheesy and kind of off, but like knowing that those were intentional choices, I think really add to the style of this movie.
No, it's a whole vibe.
Yep. Yep. What are other aspects about this film that really stood out to you, either that really worked for you or potentially you're like, I have some questions?
So another thread that's kind of running throughout this movie, I think, is the evolution of mythology and kind of the stories that we tell to ourselves and others. And we see that in Dementus. His look evolves over time, and then he also goes by different names, like different variations of Dementus over the course of the movie too, just trying on these different things to see what will stick, what will get him more power or get the reverence from others that he wants. And so he goes on his own evolution of his brand. But then we also see kind of the myth of Furiosa as that shifts and changes and evolves over the course of the film. And then another thing that I noticed while watching Fury Road this morning was how the evolution of Immortan Joe changes over the course of the two films. And you see how his brand, for lack of a better term, evolves over the two movies. And you see in Furiosa, it's a little more subdued. There's this reverence for him, and he is the leader of all of these people. But by Fury Road, it's at a whole different level. And so I really just appreciated that through line over the course of these two movies, and seeing how that myth making and that mythology plays in not just at like a cultural level, but also at an individual level as well.
Yeah, and along the same line of like the myth making is the people, the followers, the community around these figures that need to buy in and need to believe in that, and to then therefore have that reverence for them. I thought that was a fascinating part of this film. It's some of my favorite parts is when we get to see Dementus's community, his followers, just like the mini society that they have that is hierarchical within his little biker gang. You know what I mean? Little is maybe the wrong word, because at one point it is a very large set of followers that he's amassed, but how that creates this loyalty and this reverence that he needs to hold his power. And I think one of those like world building details that I really loved in this film that we get to see in Fury Road a ton, but I appreciate that we got to saw in Furiosa, get to see in Furiosa as well, is how they create those senses of community and cohesion. So when Dementus arrives at the Citadel, one of the times where he wants to lay siege, he's got his whole crew of people like revving their motorcycles at the same time, and it creates this like cacophonous, resounding sound that it's meant to intimidate, but also I think meant to create this community within them. And there's a whole dedicated person, a whole role, who is to instruct and be the conductor of when we rev our bikes at the same time to get that engine roaring in unison. And that creates this feeling of cohesion to then buy into those myths that are being told about who these figures are. And I thought those aspects of Fury Road, and I think and we get to see as well in Furiosa, are just like so fascinating to me, because I think it showcases how there are these systems of loyalty and how these communities are formed to the point where they are willing to go to battle and die for their community and for their leaders. We see that with Immortan Joe and his war boys, and kind of the psyche and rules and systems that they are within as well, to create that sense of willingness to serve. And I think that was fascinating to see.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, all these groups are so motivated by competition and scarcity and, you know, getting what others have so that they can survive. And that's in there even in the midst of these groups too. And so you see in that one scene with Dementus, when he's I I don't even know what he's accomplishing other than fear, but you know, he has these groups of 5 and they have to fight each other to get on the bike to then basically like
Yeah.
rip this other dude limb from limb. So it's interesting because there's these moments of cooperation and collaboration within the group, but the leader is also really intentional to say, nope, don't get too cozy, don't get too collaborative, because if the people collaborate too much, if they get too cozy, if they get too much power, then they will topple the leader. And it's kind of fascinating to see that dynamic in both Dementus and Immortan Joe, and the way that they wield that power and create those senses of belonging, but also make sure that people know that it really is cutthroat and dog eat dog, and they have to respond accordingly.
Yeah. Honestly, we could have gotten a whole movie of just Dementus and Immortan Joe just fighting each other for power. That would have been a great movie. They are such fascinating foils for each other, especially in like their style of villainy, which I think was really fun to see in this movie. I think we could have gotten some more moments between the two of them, or at least their cohorts fighting each other, because Immortan Joe reigns with this like grandeur, and he is not one to speak often, but when he does, he speaks with power, right? He's to be feared in that way. And Dementus has got this like really fascinating, like witty, clever, he's kind of playful, but that playfulness then translates also to in his aggression and his styles of punishment within his following. And he's kind of this almost Joker-esque type of style of villain, where there's this playfulness, but it's so intertwined with the villainy as well that it is like to be feared just as much, if not more. So I think that like seeing their styles of leadership and their styles of and flavors of villainy was just made for some good fun as well. So I would love to see some more showdowns between these two.
Also, just shout out to Chris Hemsworth for playing against type. And he seems like he is having an absolute ball
Mhm.
with this character. And so it was fun to watch him in something out of the norm for him. And you just see him really excel, and just, man, he's so insane and so maniacal. but at the same time he's also fun to watch, and so
Uh-huh.
for him to have that balance I thought was really impressive.
Yeah. Honestly, when Chris Hemsworth, when we first meet Dementis, and I'm like, that's Chris Hemsworth, my initial reaction was like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see past the Chris Hemsworthness of it all. You know what I mean? Sometimes when you like cast someone that is so iconic in these roles, they are them playing this villain. But I think he does a good job of really selling it, so that by the end, I'm like, this is Dementis. This is his style. This is who he is. So I bought it by the end, but I was a little skeptical at the beginning. I'm not gonna lie.
That's so funny because at first all I could focus on was, is that the same nose as we saw in Maestro? Like I was so focused on the nose. It's like, wow, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So it took me a while to even get to the Chris Hemsworth of it all, to then get to Dementis, because man, that nose was doing work.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. He has some really great lines towards the end of the film that I think were so, fitting for who he was as a villain, but also incredibly clever and like honestly incredibly insightful if you think about it a little bit more. And that whole showdown between him and Anya Taylor Joy at the end there, that I'm like, I think they could have they. I think that a couple more rewrites on the dialogue for him. And I think he could have had a lot more zingers throughout the film instead of saving them all for the end, because I think that's his style of villainy, is he's incredibly clever and witty and playful, and I would have loved to see even more of that earlier on, because we get it by the end, and he delivers on it by the end, but I'd love to see it a little bit more.
Okay, so more Dementis and more adult Furiosa,
Yes.
less Tom Burke's character,
Yeah,
less.
we didn't need him really. I think
Yeah,
she
we
could have
really
gotten to
didn't.
it. Yeah, less of that,
Okay.
or maybe like maybe just genuinely make him like an even faster episode in her story. You know what I mean? Like we don't even
Yeah.
let's not spend the time to build it. Just like, here's somebody who
Mm.
was good and who was advocating for you and somehow like was willing to, fight for you in some way on your side. That theme is like really prevalent in Fury Road as well. Like the way that Furiosa and Max initially are like so skeptical of each other, and they then really form a trust quickly, and which is just rare in the Wasteland. Like that all could have been, you know, part of her journey, one of the many episodes on her journey.
Mm-hmm. Yep. On this complex journey that we would then know how she chopped her arm off.
Let's rewrite that whole scene, please.
Like there honestly, I need one additional little quick shot. Show me that she has a blade concealed somewhere and I'm good. I'm fine with that. I need to know how we got a blade.
Yeah. Well,
That's it.
okay, here's my other random fixation with that scene is that the shot of her arm hanging in the chains that is left there, her arm is cut off like midway through her forearm, which isn't that so much more difficult to do, to like literally break your bone versus just break your arm off at the joint. You know what I mean? Like there's only like probably, a couple inches from where her wrist is to where there's just veins and stuff flying out, dripping. Uh that's so much harder to do. Shouldn't we just break our arm at the joint part?
But here's the thing, Jen. Uh
Yeah, ready.
Charlize Theron's half arm looked great in Fury Road.
Yeah,
So the arm has to be chopped off at the same spot.
that's true. That
It
is
just
fair.
is what it is, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. I just am looking at my arm being like, that is a much harder thing to do than in, a couple inches up. But I get it. I get it. They have to make it consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Consistency is key. Also, I know nothing about anatomy and physiology, so I'm the wrong person to have the conversation of where is the easiest to chop your arm off? Because
Right.
I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
the other detail could be she did get it injured quite badly in the car chase scene like 10 minutes earlier. So perhaps that aided in the ability to chop it off mid
Oh,
forearm
okay.
versus
Yeah, yeah,
after.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're really just looking out for whatever's easiest for you. Furiosa. Just, it's a hard task.
Okay, so that's it. She got her arm
Yes.
chopped off a little bit, little
Yes.
chop
Yeah.
in the accident. And so she was
Mhm.
like, "You know what? We already
Yes.
got a little chop here. Make it into a big chop."
Right.
Problem
Right.
solved.
This is good.
We
Okay.
got it.
See, they thought through it. They thought through it. We are the ones that, just need a little bit more time to get there. It's all there.
We do.
I still don't know how she escaped without any of the henchmen noticing, as they're literally encircling her for hours, apparently.
Jen, she's
Invisibility
Furiosa.
cloak.
Come on.
The only
She's
answer is the
Furiosa.
invisibility cloak.
Yeah, that's fine too. That works. I don't know. They're a bunch of tired dudes who are on their motorcycles doing donuts or
Mhm.
whatever. Like they're probably tired, they're probably distracted. They probably haven't eaten in so long. They are very dehydrated. So they're not thinking straight. They're not paying attention to this little girl.
Mm-hmm.
So I was fine with that. I was like, you know what? She
Okay.
is stealthy enough, probably, even though she just chopped her arm off. How did she do that silently? I don't know. But she did. And the guys were probably distracted by something. I
But
buy
if
that.
anyone could chop their arm off and not
Hmm.
make a peep, it is
Yeah,
Furiosa. Like there's no one else
honestly.
on planet Earth or in
Yeah,
the fantasy, fictional universe. There's no one else.
yeah. I buy that.
And also somehow like execute a plan seamlessly. It's amazing. It's amazing. Um,
Mhm.
okay. Other big things that we wanted to mention with Furiosa.
I just want to shout out the score because the
Mm,
score is doing work in this movie. Oh
yep.
my gosh. There is so much going on and there's not a lot of dialogue. And so, one of the ways, in addition to the actors emoting, for us to actually understand the emotions of a scene is through the score. And
Mm-hmm.
it is absolutely spot on. There were so many times
So
when I was
good.
like, oh, yeah, no, this is exactly what I want to be hearing right now. So just shout out to the score. Excellently done,
So good.
beautifully paced, comes in at the right time, is silent at the right time, just spot on.
Mm-hmm. And it also just it heightens and adds a whole layer of dimension and excitement to the action sequences too, which like there's already a lot of crashing and burning and loud sounds that happen within obviously an action sequence in a Mad Max movie, but the score like heightens certain moments and adds to and enhances the action that we're seeing unfold visually. So like musically all of that is so like aligned. It's not just like epic sounding music as things are unfolding. No, like the pacing and the rhythm of the action is perfectly aligned to the score. And when we get like big drops and big drums or whatnot, like it all is working together so seamlessly. So I love that. I mean, Fury Road does an incredible job with this, and I'm so glad that that aspect of this movie lives up to the standards that were set in its predecessor. So that was really great.
Yeah, yeah. I was really appreciating being able to see this movie in theaters, uh,
Yes. Oh my gosh.
because it's such a better experience than what
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to replicate at home. So
Right.
I was really thankful for this opportunity. Even though I didn't like love Furiosa, I'm really glad that it got a theater release and I got to see it in theaters because it is
Yes.
it is worthy of the big screen.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was one of the things that we probably spent like 10 minutes lamenting in our Fury Road episode. It's just that
Yes.
we didn't get to see it in a theater experience. So we need to do some like anniversary screenings of that movie. Movie theaters, listen up. We need it. We're looking for it. One of the
Yeah.
other things that I really loved about the action sequences in Furiosa were the creativity in the types of foes that we got to fight along the way. So, particularly, one of my favorites was we got to see the crew of people that could fly with different, like parasails and parachutes of different kinds. Like, I thought that that was such a fun way to make that visually more creative, but also showcase how our protagonists that we're following have to get more creative and how they need to figure out how to fight these people that are attacking them in the war rig. So I thought that was really really fun. I think it's one of the best parts of Fury Road as well. Is just the creativity visually in the different types of vehicles and whatnot. And we're now taken to the air, so we get to see different types of flying vehicles and how that gives our foes initially the advantage, but we get to see how our protagonists get to respond and react to figure out how to cleverly thwart the advantage that their foes have. So I thought that was really, really fun.
Well, and I loved that that was almost like a throwback to one of the earlier Mad Maxes. I don't remember if it was 2 or 3. Oh, I think it was 2. Where that one guy had his little helicopter thing.
Mm.
So it just it in addition to being this really cool, new, exciting way to fight and showing off this creativity, I think it was also a nice way to
Mm-hmm.
incorporate these movies together in a way that's not super on the nose. Because if you've seen, I think it's the second one, then you're like, oh yeah, there was that dude who flew in his
Mm.
little
Yep.
helicopter thing. Okay, this is related to those. And so I think that that's just a good example of how to tie a franchise together
Mm-hmm.
through the little details rather than having to be like, okay, this is related to that other movie because of these 3 things. Let me spell it out for you. Like, this is just
Mm-hmm.
a very seamless way of it's all the same world. These all go
Mm-hmm.
together, even though they're at different time periods.
Yep. Yep. No, that's so true. And what I love about the Mad Max movies is that sometimes we're fighting the foes that we know, right? Like this is like a Morton Joe's army that's coming for us, or it's Dementor's army. But half the time we're fighting people that we don't really know who they are. And that kind of makes it even more thrilling. You know what I mean? Like it just something in the desert. This is we're in their territory, we're in their land in some way, and we're just getting attacked and we need to survive. And that in and of itself is enough for us to make that scene exciting. And I think it then makes those moments where you are fighting a foe that you do know and have all this, like emotional stakes with and beef with all that stuff, even more exciting by the time that we get there. But there's often these like bits throughout, and especially in like the first half of the movie where we're fighting some people because we've encroached on their territory. And that's so like accurate to the way that it would be if you were in an environment like the wasteland where everybody's trying to hold their territory, keep their spots, and you see someone coming, your first assumption is that they are coming to kill you. And that's just the rules of the survival in this society. And I think that just we just immediately buy into that in some of those action sequences. We're just finding unnamed people that look scary.
Yeah, and have very creative ways to kill you. So,
Mm-hmm.
got to do what you got to do to survive.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay. Any other last thoughts before we wrap?
How did you feel about those kind of 5 sections that this is broken into?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't have a problem with those 5 sections in and of themselves. I think that's like a interesting way to structure a movie like this and cover a lot of timeline and to cover a lot of ground quickly. The problem with those 5 sections were that within each of the sections, I don't really know what we're doing and what our goal is. And so it's a great way to break things up. But overall, like what I think that each of those sections maybe need to have a little bit of a clear like conflict. Like we're just trying to survive because of X, Y, and Z, and then move on to the next thing. Or hey, we're now in the Citadel and we're trying to rise to the ranks so that we can escape. Like I think those it felt a little bit like we were wandering through this movie and just kind of visiting different parts of Furiosa's life versus an overarching theme or a goal. So had those individual 5 sections been a little bit like had a little bit more like forward momentum, I think they would have been better. So my problem is more with the overall like emotional arc and development of the character, the lack of like a direction and a goal versus those 5 sections in and of themselves. But I think the 5 sections make it easier perhaps to just feel like we're just visiting 5 different episodes throughout the timeline of Furiosa's life, which I think don't really work as well as it could have done. What about you? What did you think of that structural framing?
It's not my favorite. And it tends to be not my favorite in movies.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot for me to like that positioning. And I don't know that it added a ton to this. I think that there's a way that you can tell this story without those, kind of connecting all of these together as she's going about her life. But I definitely agree with you that it did feel kind of aimless for a
Mm-hmm.
little while there. I think once she becomes Furiosa and she is on this like path for revenge and all of that, then it's like, okay, yeah, we are in revenge flick territory. This is great, let's freaking go. I think before that, though, it does feel a little bit like, okay, what are we doing, what is our goal other than survival? But that's a good goal, but like I needed a little bit more. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a maybe a different way to structure this to maybe make those goals a little bit more apparent, and then maybe we don't need those 5 sections kind of spelled out for us, because we're on the ride, as opposed to we go through these events and then like, oop, okay, now we are transitioning to
Yep.
this portion of her life. Oop, now we got to be taken out of it, and now we're in this other portion of her life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a way to maybe more fluidly let us know that's what's going on, rather than having it spelled out for us.
Agreed. I actually think that had they chosen not to follow that like 5 act structure, perhaps they would have restructured this entire movie to be very different. Maybe we start from Furiosa rising the ranks in the Citadel, and then we learn about her backstory through other means, but maybe we don't even start from her as a child, and spend so much time there. But instead, we get this is what the Napoleon movie did. You know what I mean? We just like kind of visit through sections of a life, and then we arrive at the end, and you're like, yeah, okay, but like, what is our goal? And it's such a contrast to Fury Road, where we know our goal immediately. We're trying to escape. And the whole movie, honestly, when you were mentioning earlier, like, I just remember that whole like escape chase scene. I don't blame you, because the whole movie really is a whole big escape chase scene where Furious is trying to escape and she's getting chased by Morton Joe, and her whole goal is basically survive. And I think that in and of itself, like, we can get on board with. We know what we're trying to do. We're getting somewhere. We're trying to go to some place called the Green Place. We don't know where that is, but we want these people to survive because we're rooting for them. And so immediately, every scene that happens, every foe that they meet, we're emotionally invested because we're emotionally invested in their mission. I don't think Furiosa really has a mission in this movie except for like grow up and not be, I don't know, emotionally scarred or try and find revenge somehow. It's a little bit more hazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's why I'm so impressed by Fury Road upon
Mm-hmm.
rewatch, because it really is a 2 hour long chase.
Yes.
Like, that is the movie. And
Yep.
yet, by the end, you realize that there was a whole story in here too. So I think
Yeah.
that's what makes it so impressive. Like, even though
Yeah.
there's very little dialogue, it's all essentially in moving vehicles, uh there is a real meaty
Yeah.
story here, and there's all of the parts of a story that you would expect, and the way that it ends is so satisfying for the characters and for this arc and for these larger themes that the film is inviting us to explore. Like, it's really impressive what this screenplay was able to do
Mm-hmm.
for a 2 hour long chase. And I don't think that I
Mm-hmm.
appreciated that as much the first time that I watched it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Fury Road also develops each of the characters so fully. Like, each character has a whole arc that they go on. Even Nicholas Holt's character as a war boy has a whole arc that feels so satisfying that he goes in. And then their ability to like interweave all of these characters that feel rich and three-dimensional and have full growth moments and arcs that they go on together, and we're getting chased. Like, it's just just an incredible screenplay. Really, really good. As I was watching Fury Road after getting home from Furiosa, I was just like, oh no. I think our episode's just going to be me just raving about this other movie and not talking about Furiosa the whole time, because there's so much that's so good there. And I think there's a lot that if we took from Fury Road that was so great and infused it into Furiosa, I think Furiosa could have been a much better movie. It's so interesting too. I didn't know if you felt some type of way about this, but I found it fascinating that the whole ending credits, they're basically intercutting clips and sequences from Fury Road into the ending credits of this movie, which felt like just such a nod to like we know that what you really love is Fury Road, and we're going to give you this, but also like there's plenty to whet your palate to go home and literally watch that other movie. Just felt like such a interesting choice. The whole time I was thinking about watching Fury Road again, and then by the time that they intercut the credit sequences, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm all in now. I'm sold.
Yeah, no, I thought it was weird. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly it was effective because we both watched Fury Road after watching Furiosa, so mission
Yeah.
accomplished. But I felt similarly to you the whole time I was watching Furiosa. I was like, man, why can't I be watching Fury
Yeah.
Road in the theater right now? Like that would be such a fun experience. So then in the end of the movie to be reminded of the movie that is
Uh-huh.
better than this movie, and I don't even think that Furiosa is bad, but it's just not as good as Fury Road. And so I was already comparing the two the whole time. And then the film intercuts footage from the thing that I love. I It's a weird choice. Like we know
Right?
that they're connected. We already know that. We already got it. We didn't need this even more direct comparison because I think that Furiosa is going to lose in that comparison every single time. So like why do that? I don't get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the movie is like so self-aware to know that that is the case, and so this is just like one long big teaser trailer for the movie that you already fell in love with that came out many years ago. You know what I mean? Like it's like it knows, so they're like, okay, we'll just give it to you anyway. We know that you missed this movie and you loved it. Go home and watch it because here's some really cool, and they picked the best clips too. You know what I mean? Of the like motorcycles like hopping in like midair over these like sand dunes, and like they knew which clips to include too. It's very good. Well done. Very odd. Very strange.
Very odd.
But like
And what I
highly effective because we both went home to watch Furious.
yeah. But I'm wondering how many other people also did this. So when I
Yeah.
logged into Max this morning to watch Fury Road, it was not in the top 10.
Hmm.
And so I was like, okay, are people maybe not going to go see Furiosa yet in
Yeah.
theaters? Like it's still pretty early in its release, or maybe everybody that's watching they have it on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever. Maybe
Hmm.
it's like physical media people. I don't know, but I was surprised when I had to go and search for Fury
Yeah. Me
Road
too.
instead of it just being like bing top 10. Everyone's
Yeah.
watching it because everybody has watched Furiosa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in general, I think that I read a couple headlines that it's not doing as well as I expected to. Perhaps it's the holiday weekend and people are just, out on their patios with family and whatnot. But I'm intrigued to see how much box office success this movie actually has. Maybe the trailer with the really bad CGI is just turning more people away, which it did for us. We were a little skeptical going into this, so I wonder if there's just like less interest in this at all. Apparently, the Garfield movie is doing really well, so that's a thing. I don't know.
That's
Funky.
that's sad. I mean, I know my experience was I was one of four people to see this on Saturday at 11 a.m.
Mhm.
It was a huge theater. I was seated in the back row, which was row U. I don't know that I've ever sat in a row U before. This theater was giant, and there was four of us humans in it. So
Wow.
at least at the 11 a.m. showtime, there was no appetite for Furiosa. So there's
No
that.
motorcycles and
No.
spiky dudes and war boys before noon.
Yeah.
Apparently, for some
I guess
people,
I guess it's too early. I don't whatever. It's fine.
up for it. Skip your coffee. Go see Furiosa. You're good.
Honestly
You are
though, you will be
awake.
wide awake.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I walked out
wow.
of the theater into the like sun shining in suburbia in like the like quiet parking lot. I was like, wow, I yes. The absence of sound is deafening right now because I was just soaked in it for
Mm,
about 2 hours and a
mhm.
half.
Yeah. Ugh.
So,
And just driving home in
yeah.
silence after that, is just the best.
It's
It's
good.
like, yes,
It's good.
my nice, peaceful drive
The
home,
trees.
the This is
The green
lovely.
trees.
Yes.
We have found the green place, I suppose.
We have.
All right. Well, this was a review and discussion of Furiosa. As we mentioned, you can find it available out in theaters, and it is well worth going to the theaters to watch this movie and experiencing it in all its fullness. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Furiosa. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Movies and Us Pod, or you can email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film Deadpool. Speaking of big franchises, there's a new Deadpool coming out this year, so we are going to be reviewing Deadpool 1 and 2 in anticipation of that. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again very soon.